Proposal number 2 is ordered choice voting. This will probably be the most popular policy in the agenda, because it is based on common sense. Who would not want more choices of candidates in elections? The only people who will likely oppose this are those who have a vested interest in the dominance of the major political parties. Let's start by examining conventional voting. This is a method often referred to as a first-past-the-post tally of results. In this example, we have 5 voters voting on 5 candidates. The 5 candidates are Alice, Bob, Charles, Dirk, and Elliot. Person 1 and Person 3 vote for Alice. Person 2 votes for Dirk. Person 4 votes for Charles, and Person 5 votes for Bob. Elliot receives no votes. Let's also assume that each voter identifies with one of 2 major political philosophies or parties. Persons 1 and 3 who also happen to vote for Alice prefer Party A. Persons 2, 4, and 5 prefer political Party B but split their votes between Dirk, Charles, and Bob. As you can see here, in the conventional vote Alice receives more votes than anyone else with 40% of the total votes. She wins the election. However, at the same time Party B represents the majority of the voters in this district at 60%. Because Party B voters did not consolidate their votes into one choice, they lose the election despite having the numerical advantage. This is known as splitting the vote. Ideally this should never happen. This is one of the reasons major political parties exist. They try to pre-select candidates in primaries so that votes are not split in the general election. However, the same problems present themselves in the primary elections since each political party has its own factions. As a result, members of competing factions will vote strategically to prevent the opposing faction from getting elected. The narrative then becomes if you do not vote for the person with the greatest likelihood of winning, you are throwing your vote away since only the most well-known candidate can beat the other side. This usually translates into people voting for the people with the most name recognition, who also usually tends to be the person with the most money and corporate media attention. In this case voters who would prefer to vote for Dirk and Bob, would be incentivized to vote for Charles with the most money. Likewise, in general elections the 2 major parties will try to demonize people voting for independent candidates. This is why big money dominates politics. Ideally people should be able to vote their consciences for the best candidates regardless of money, without having to vote strategically so they do not split the vote. Ordered choice voting completely eliminates this problem. Let's look at an example of how this works. With ordered choice voting instead of voting for one candidate, each person orders a list from his favorite candidate to his least favorite candidate. For example, person 1's favorite candidate is still Alice who is listed as number 1. The second favorite candidate is Dirk at number 2. The third favorite candidate for person 1 is Elliot. The fourth favorite candidate is Bob. And the least favorite candidate for person 1 is Charles. Persons 2 through 5 also list their favorite candidates in order. In our version of ordered choice voting we take this information to run head-to-head races between each of the individual candidates. This way there is no splitting the vote or any strategic considerations. You know exactly who wins each head-to-head race. If a candidate beats every single candidate in head-to-head competition, then that candidate is clearly the winner. For this we need to make a total number of comparisons given by the formula you see on your screen which represents a combination of n candidates picking 2. For a 5-person race this is given by 5 times 4 divided by 2 which gives us 10 total comparisons needed. The 10 comparisons needed can be seen at the bottom of the screen here. Let's look at a few examples to show you how these head-to-head races are evaluated. We will start by a hypothetical head-to-head race between Alice and Bob. First, we eliminate everyone in the list who is not Alice or Bob. We then look to see who comes first on the list for each person. The person higher in the list should be who that person would vote for in a head-to-head race. Here you can see that Alice appears first for persons 1 through 4, while Bob is the preferred candidate for person 5. Thus it is clear Alice wins this head-to-head race 4 votes to 1. Next we repeat the same process in the head-to-head race between Alice and Charles. We eliminate everyone who is not Alice or Charles and look to see who is ordered first. Persons 1 through 3 each prefer Alice. Persons 4 and 5 each prefer Charles. Thus it is clear Alice wins this head-to-head race 3 votes to 2. Now we repeat the same process in the head-to-head race between Alice and Dirk. We eliminate everyone who is not Alice or Dirk and look to see who is ordered first. Persons 1 and 3 each prefer Alice. Persons 2, 4, and 5 each prefer Dirk. In this case the vote is right along party lines. This time it is Dirk who wins this head-to-head race 3 votes to 2. We continue this process for each of the remaining 7 head-to-head matchups. You can see the winners of each of these races below based on the ordered choices above. Now we tally up the number of wins for each candidate. We can then order the candidates based on the number of victories they have in head-to-head races. This then becomes a representation of the aggregate preference for each candidate by the voting district as a whole. In this example, Dirk wins the most races with 4 victories, defeating each of the other candidates. Alice is the second most preferred candidate, losing only to Dirk. Elliot is the third most popular candidate, beating both Bob and Charles in head-to-head races, despite being the first choice of no one. Bob is the fourth most popular candidate, beating only Charles. Charles comes in last place, being beat by everyone else. So, it should be clear here that Dirk is the clear winner despite not winning the most first-place votes. In a head-to-head race with every other candidate, he wins. This is the result we want. It is also important to recognize that the method used here is not the one used in those few jurisdictions around the world using ranked choice voting. Usually a selection method known as instant runoff voting is used. This will give the right result most of the time, but we do not use it because it can produce some errors. For example, if you used instant runoff voting, Elliot would be the first candidate eliminated since he receives no first-place votes. But he wins head-to-head versus Bob and Charles, so clearly Elliot should be in third place. In some instances, instant runoff voting will get the winner completely wrong. If you are interested in knowing more details about how that can happen, then see our video on the flaws of instant runoff voting. Now that we have solved the problem of splitting the vote, we have no reason to discourage more candidates from getting on the ballot. This is especially true if we are using computerized voting, and there is no need to print paper ballots. As part of this proposal, we will include enhanced ballot access for candidates. Right now, candidates usually have to gather signatures to register to vote. This can be a lot of work for candidates who do not have a lot of money or volunteers to collect signatures. Additionally, corrupt officials can just ignore signatures to keep candidates off the ballot. For example, recently Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose did everything he could to prevent an independent opponent, Tormars, from running against him. This included instructing counties to arbitrarily throw out signature petitions and convening a last-minute kangaroo court that ignored all due process rights, including the right to confront your accuser. The Ohio Supreme Court intervened, but only after the candidate spent a lot of money in attorney's fees. This should never happen, but it happens routinely worldwide to lesser-known candidates. To make it easier to get on the ballot, candidates should be given an option of paying a simple monetary fee instead of gathering signatures. This is a system used in Washington state quite successfully, although the fee is arguably still too high. We believe that a person should be able to pay an amount equal to 0.1% of the annual salary of the office sought to be added to the ballot. So, if the position pays $200,000 a year, then the registration fee should be a reasonable $200. Since you only have to prove payment, it is much harder for corrupt officials like Frank LaRose to keep people off the ballot. Additionally, we want to eliminate all loser laws. Loser laws exist to prevent candidates who lose a primary nomination from seeking office in the general election. These laws only serve to serve the interests of major political parties and deprive people of choice in the general election. Indeed, the entire rationale behind these laws is to keep people from the same party from spoiling an election by splitting the vote. With the adoption of ordered choice voting, splitting the vote is no longer a problem. Remember, people can only vote in one primary, even though they might like candidates in more than one primary. Voters should not be constrained by political parties or forced to choose. Primaries are a bad idea if you want to empower voters with as many choices as possible. So, we need to eliminate all loser laws and make it illegal for a party to contractually obligate people who seek a nomination to avoid running in the general election if they lose. In an ideal world, governments would not even support political parties or acknowledge major party primaries. These only divide a nation into factions that do not need to exist. Everything should be decided in the general election using ordered choice voting. With ordered choice voting and an expanded number of people running for office, we will get better choices in elections. We will no longer forced into choosing one of the lesser of two evils to avoid splitting the vote. People can vote their consciences. A typical ballot under this new system is shown on this screen. Here the person chooses the independent party I as the top choice, not worried about splitting the vote. Then the person chooses party B, starting with the one he wants the most, and then putting the candidate with all the special interest money dead last among the party B candidates. This would normally be the person this voter would reluctantly vote for to defeat party A. The person then puts party A candidate last, with the most establishment candidate last. A system like this is the only way you can realistically start to prevent money from buying an office. If you want to see an example of how this could work in the real world, click the link titled 21st Century Voting in the 1984 No More Paradigm in the description below.